Can you understand what infrastructure your organization owns without a good survey? People say we live in the digital age now, but despite that fact, most organizations today, public and private, need some kind of physical infrastructure. So even major tech companies maintain buildings worth hundreds of millions of dollars. We do a lot of that work here at my firm because we're located in the Central Valley. So I've worked on server farms in the Bay Area. We've worked on warehouses for Amazon here in the Central Valley. So even big tech companies maintain a lot of physical infrastructure. So that hasn't changed. When I say infrastructure in that question, what do I mean? I'm talking about buildings, roads, and utilities, right? Pipelines, canals, cell phone towers, that kind of stuff. So wise organizations understand what infrastructure they own. So I'll give you an example. Perhaps a utility company can tell you the size, material, condition, and age of every pipe in their sewer network, right? So a sanitary district, maybe they've got that information about every pipe. Most organizations do a fairly good job of telling you what they think they own, although there are some organizations that can't do that, including the federal government. But a wise organization will have some accounting of what it owns. But many of those same organizations that can tell you what they own can't tell you where that very same infrastructure is. So I have an example in my other videos of a small town that sold a parcel with their water tower by accident. Thankfully, the developer, the business person that bought the parcel with the water tower was willing to give it back to the city. But that's an example of an organization that maybe understood they owned the water tower, so they knew what they owned, but they didn't know where it was, right? And so that's why it got sold by accident. So when I say where, most organizations don't understand where their infrastructure is. What do I mean by the word where? So I mean three things. They don't know where it is on the surface of the earth. Okay, so that's kind of the geospatial element there. They don't know where it is in relation to their other infrastructure. Okay, so that's important. How far is the water tower from the pump station or from the building next door? And they don't know where their infrastructure is in relation to their real estate. So the land they own, either easements or right-of-ways or fee ownership. So they can't answer any of those questions a lot of times. There's another recent example I'm going to try and talk about in another video of a city that is suing a contractor because they had a bunch of work done on their underground water utility infrastructure, and a bunch of it got installed outside of the easements that the city had. So that's an example of somebody not being able to answer the where question, right? We know we have a water main here, but where is it, and is it in our easement? Is it in our property rights? So why is there that disconnect? Why do wise organizations have some idea of what they own, but a really bad idea of where that stuff is? And I'm going to give you a few reasons why there is that disconnect. The first is to answer the where question properly usually requires a survey. So you got to have a survey to answer that question as a general rule. And the problem with that is, the second reason it's hard to answer the where question is surveyors are grouchy hermits. So we don't do a good job of communicating how we add value and when you need a survey and what kind of survey you need. And we can be difficult to work with. That's our fault. That's a failure we have as a profession. There's not a lot of other surveyors on YouTube trying to educate people. So that's a problem. The third thing is the concepts that you need to make the where part of managing infrastructure to make that work well. Those concepts aren't always easy to understand. You have to know something about property rights and something about coordinate reference systems and map projections and datums and benchmarks, and there's a lot that goes into doing that right and doing it well. So that can be a challenge. And the other thing is, where isn't cheap. Because you usually need a land surveyor to answer that question with any reasonable degree of accuracy. Answering the question is not inexpensive, right? Surveys are not cheap, and so a lot of times people skip the where part because it's expensive to answer the question. But just because it's expensive doesn't mean that it's not important or doesn't need to be answered. So let's go back to that original question, and I've kind of hinted at the answer. Can you understand what your organization owns without a good survey, the infrastructure? The answer is no, you can't. If you want to know what physical infrastructure your organization owns and manages and maintains, you have to have good surveys. You can't do it without. You can't use the tax assessor data, the tax assessor map, or your Garmin GPS receiver. If you really want to know what you own and where it's at, you got to get good surveys. Now, an important thing to remember here is if that infrastructure that you think is yours isn't on your property, if it's not in your real estate, if it's not in your right-of-way or in your easement or on your fee parcel, then you might not own it. You might think you own it, but you might actually not own it if it's not on your property, right? You get into some tricky legal questions there, and it's not good. It's not good to have your physical infrastructure outside the limits of the property rights that you own and control. So what type of survey do you need? If I've convinced you that you need to be able to answer the where question with a reasonable degree of accuracy if you want to know what it is exactly your organization owns, what infrastructure it owns, what type of surveys do you need to get? So you really need two. Okay? You need a boundary survey or a right-of-way survey, and that tells you where your property rights are. And then you need what we call a topographic survey or an as-built survey to tell you where the infrastructure is. When you pair those two surveys together, where's the property rights, where's the infrastructure, then you can answer that question, what do we own and where is it, right? Where is it on the surface of the earth? Where is it in relation to other infrastructure? Where is it in relation to our property rights? Those are the three important questions. Now, in order for that to work, you need to have your surveys that are executed done on a common coordinate reference system and a common basis of control. That requires some forethought and some planning. You can't just go hire the cheapest surveyor you can find and have him do a survey over here and then get the next cheapest surveyor and have her do a survey over here. That's not all going to fit together, right? So you want to give that some thought. You want to think about how your infrastructure surveys will tie into your GIS system if you have one, and you should if you're managing infrastructure at any kind of scale. So these are not easy questions, but they are answerable, and it's important. You can't understand what infrastructure your organization owns, manages, and maintains if you can't answer the where question, and you can't answer the where questions without good surveys, right? And remember, you need two kinds. You need property surveys, boundary surveys, and you need actual surveys of the physical infrastructure itself. Now, there's a lot of questions this brings up, right? How do I pay for this, Landon? I know I need to be doing it. I should have been doing it 20 years ago. My organization should have been doing it 20 years ago, but it's expensive and I don't know how to pay for it. That's a good question. We'll talk some more about that. Another question is, hey, what should that process look like? If I decide that I want to start getting surveys as part of my infrastructure management program, my capital improvement program, what does that look like? How do I make sure I get good surveys and I get the data I need? Good questions. We'll talk about that. We'll do that. We'll cover those questions in some other videos. And then finally, you might be wondering, well, I thought, isn't my civil engineer doing this? I have an engineering department. Aren't they figuring all this stuff out? That's a good question. We can answer that. We'll talk about why assuming your civil engineer or your architect or your building manager is taking care of that may not be a fantastic idea. I will have Lori, our content marketing specialist, put a link in the description to this video. I will have her link to the video about the water tower that got sold by accident. I will also have her link to the video that talks about why you need a right-of-way manager or a property manager and not just a facilities manager or building manager. Those are related questions. And we'll do some more videos on this topic. But remember, you can't accurately determine what infrastructure, physical infrastructure your organization owns if you don't have some good surveys. You can't. If you don't know where it's at in relation to your property rights, then you can't be confident that you own it free and clear.